All right, we'll be in the book of Titus chapter 3 here shortly. So as we have studied through the book of Titus, I've titled the overall study Important Things, and we're just looking at some of the topics that Paul discusses with Titus as Titus tries to set things straight on the island of Crete. And here's kind of been our list so far. Importance of elders, we talked about sound doctrine, and then we had an addendum on sound doctrine from the second part of chapter 1 there. We talked about the importance of our behavior. We talked about God's grace. Tonight and next week are really going to be kind of a pair of lessons that are going to actually tie together, because there's actually two themes that are going to run parallel with the next 2 weeks. Really, this is going to capture chapter 3, verses 1 all the way down through 11. We're going to kind of stay pretty close to the first 7 verses tonight, but then we will repeat some of that next week. It's really difficult to look at one of these themes without the other one, so like I said, they're going to kind of overlap. Tonight, we're going to try to look, parse out a little bit some ideas about submission. So in this section is a huge, important lesson to us about submitting to one another and submitting to God. But running parallel with the submission component is another component about us doing good deeds. So you'll see those two embedded together as we go through, and we'll talk about both of them both nights. But tonight our emphasis in submission. Next week the emphasis will be good deeds. Okay, but just know we'll look at the same text 2 different times from 2 different, trying to emphasize 2 different ideas. All right, so let's start first of all. I want for us to notice there are some bookends on the first part of this, and you'll see the bookends have to do with good deeds. But in verse 1 of chapter 3, Paul says, remind them to be subject to rulers, to authorities, to be obedient, and to be ready for every good deed. So there's that idea. You see in verse 1, there's the concept of submission and the concept of good deeds together. Now, if you'll go down to verse 8, this is a trustworthy statement, and concerning these things I want to speak confidently, so that those who have believed God will be careful to engage in good deeds. These are good and profitable for men. So there's good deeds in verse 8 again. And submission is implied here, because he is instructing the guys to submit to his teaching and do good deeds. So again, they run parallel there. Now, what's interesting, in the middle of those 7 verses, if you look at verse 5, he saved us not on the basis of deeds. So here again we have this idea of works, of deeds. It's 3 times in these 7 verses, so that is, again, indicates that's something that Paul was trying to stress to us. But there is also an attitude of submission that is running throughout this text as well. Notice the good deeds there in verse 5. So let's put some meat on the submission piece tonight. We'll come back with the good deeds piece next week. All right, so he begins by saying, remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities and to be obedient, ready for every good work. Paul uses 2 words here. He uses be subject to rulers and authorities. So the question is he just repeating himself? Are these 2 words synonyms? I would suggest to you that they have 2 different meanings. They're not necessarily, they're sort of synonyms, I guess, if you want to, but they really indicate in the Greek 2 different ideas. The first Greek word indicates at the level of a governing authority that we might call the master in charge. So Paul says, be subject to the rulers, the masters, if you will, who are in charge of everything. The authorities are those who have been given responsibility to carry out the master's charge. So it might be like in a school system, you might have the principal, the master, isn't that right? Master, yeah. And then you have the teacher, who would be the authority. So the teacher has got to follow the instructions of the principal and the school. So there's different levels there. I think that's the idea that Paul is saying here, is that we are to be subject to both components here. Not only those who are overseeing everything, but those who we are immediately having to be responsible for. Paul also tells us two ways to behave to them, to relate to them. So the two words that Paul says about our behavior is, one of them is to submit, and the other one is to obey. These, again, could be considered synonyms perhaps, but they do have two different meanings in the Greek again. The distinction here, I think, is that to obey is an action. So if I'm obeying the principal, or if I'm obeying my teacher, if you will, then I may not necessarily agree with their position, and I may not even like what they're telling me. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to obey it. It's an action on my part based on the information they've given me. This idea of obey, if you look at that word in the Greek, it has to do with more of an attitude. Obey is action. Submit is our attitude. I think I said those backwards. Obey is our action. I'm going to obey what they tell me. Submit has more to do with the attitude that I have. So not only are we to obey the authorities, but we're to do it with a good attitude. So that's kind of what Paul is telling us here. And again, all the different levels that we might have. All right, a few questions about some of this now for us to talk about. First thing I want is we kind of talk about this a little bit. What does remind them, what does that imply to us? That's what, at the first row out of the cage. Remind them.
They've fallen away from doing it.
So, right, so they've fallen away, so what does that tell us had happened?
I've already told them once.
I've already told them once. And now we're going to tell them again. So, Titus, I need for you to remind these guys. Now remember when we looked at the overall picture of the book of Titus, Paul spent some time there on the island of Crete. We don't know how long, but that was before he got shipwrecked. He spent some time there in the port. Very possible that it was at that point Paul did the traveling around that part of the island and was able to get some congregation started. He no doubt told them what was going on there and told them about submission. So now he's telling Titus, hey, remind them. So Paul, first of all, Paul's already taught them. Second part of this is, why would Paul be reminding? Why would Paul be telling Titus to remind them? What does that imply to us?
It's important.
Yeah, it's important. And Pam, what did you say?
Oh, that they had fallen away.
Yeah, they've quit doing that. I think Paul has got word that there's some trouble going on in the churches here. We need to get this fixed. The scope of this information is pretty limited. Okay, it's a very it implies a lot of different things, but as far as the information, it is very tight. And I think Paul is addressing things that he knows there's problems there. And so we need to address them and we need to fix them. And Titus, you need to do this for us while you're there. So that's this idea of reminding and why Paul is having Titus remind them. So why was this teaching important on the island of Crete? So let me answer this question just because I've done some reading about kind of the governing situation, what was going on in the island of Crete. You remember how did Paul describe a Cretan? You remember how he described them?
They were liars.
They were liars, crummy people. And then Paul even says, and their testimony is true. So remember, Paul had spent time there. He knew what kind of folks these were. They were not, from a moral point of view, they weren't very good. They were difficult people. And I think the reason that this idea of submission is so huge here is because Paul knows the kind of people that were there. They're not a very submissive people. Matter of fact, there's some writings about all of the rebellions that the Christians had led, like against the Romans, and against almost every group that had come in and tried to oversee them. They rebelled against them. They did not want to subject themselves to any other buddy that came in. They were always fighting, always troublemaking, stirring up problems. And Paul's going to talk specifically about some more of this in just a moment. So that's why I think this was important, especially on the island of Crete, because of the kind of behavior that they participated in. Why is this teaching important for us as Christians? Now, there's two parts to this. Why is that kind of teaching? You think about what it was to be a citizen on the island of Crete and the way that you would normally behave. Just the normal citizen, the way they behaved. Liars, rebellious, crummy people. Why is it so important for the Christian to behave differently? What does that tell the people on the island?
We're different.
That's huge. And I think Paul is writing to these churches on Crete, saying, look, you guys got to look different than the world. You cannot look like them. You got to look different. You got to talk different. You got to behave different, because you are now children of God. And really, this entire section, verses 1 through 11, that's the main point here. You have got to look different than the world. So, same question, why is this teaching important for us? Same exact principle. The world has got to see us behaving differently. They've got to hear us speaking differently. They got to see us responding to things differently. We don't behave like the world does. Because if we are behaving like the world does, we are in violation of God's promises for us. That's not the way God wants us to behave. And by the way, Paul's not done yet. He's going to talk a whole lot more about this very point in just a moment. Now, let's put a little disclaimer here. How far does the submission and obedience to the rulers and authorities, how far does that go?
Right up to the point where it contradicts the laws of God.
So,
how he tells us to live.
Acts chapter 5:29, Peter says, we got to obey God and nothing. So there's a line somewhere in the sand. And I think it's fairly easy for us to find most of the time. If we're faithful with Scripture, we know where that line is. You know, it's not okay to submit or obey anything that violates the promise and the principles of living the Christian life. We just have to consciously object. Okay? Whatever phrase we want to use there. Other than that, even if we disagree with it, if it's not a violation of God's promise, I believe Paul is saying submit and obey. You don't like the speed limit at 55? I'm sorry, guys. Go 55. I believe that's what God would require of us, because He wants us to be different. And He wants us to submit to the rulers and the authorities, to the laws that are set in place. Now, he pairs this idea of the submission piece. Also be ready for every good deed. I want for us to tie these two ideas together. When he says be ready for every good deed, this phrase now implies submission to God, because this is God's teaching for me. Okay? So he says, submit to the rulers and the authorities. That's our legal stuff. And now he says, oh, and by the way, submit to me. So the submission hasn't changed. We still submit. This phrase implies submission to God. It would stress the importance of being ready to do good deeds. Now, I don't know if I put this down or not. Did I put this down? I did, good. The Greek word for ready implies a person who is prepared. And it also implies the idea of someone who is willing and is eager. So let's go back to our speed limit deal, because that's something that we've all broken. So we go back to speed limit's 55. I believe what God is teaching us here about being ready for every good deed, part of that includes me following the laws of the land. And not only following the law of the land, but I am ready, I am prepared to follow that. I've got my mind set on it, and I'm willing, and I'm eager to do my best to try to follow the laws of the land. And again, I know there's always weird exceptions to all these things, so that all goes without saying. I'm talking about the principle that we have in our minds. So what does this communicate to us as Christians about our daily behavior? So take a step back. What's the big piece here? My life in Durant, Oklahoma.
Come out from among them and be different, be separate.
Be separate, be different. And how does it describe my daily life in Durant, America? Or in Marietta, America?
Be ready for every good deed.
Be ready for every good deed. And here's the word I'm looking for. What kind of citizen am I going to be?
Law-abiding.
Not only law-abiding, I'm going to be the very best citizen I can possibly be. Not only law-abiding, but I am what? Ready and prepared for every good deed. And that's it. I believe this is community-wide. He is writing these things to congregations that are in cities. And he says, hey, you guys follow the authorities, follow their rules, and be ready for every good deed. Get out in the community and serve. Be ready. Be prepared for whatever is out there. So these two verses to start with, I believe are absolutely beautiful, and I believe they're absolutely essential for us as the children of God. And it speaks volumes to us about our attitudes and about our behaviors. All right, comments?
Is that applicable to meat as well?
To what?
To meat?
Maybe not me. Maybe not me. Yeah, I think everywhere that we are, my wife and I have lived overseas. Learning the different laws, we violate a lot of laws just out of ignorance. We didn't violate. Matter of fact, we went over and above while we were in Slovakia to make sure we lived according to, because we didn't want to get thrown in the popo over there, because we might still be there. But we did try to be subject and obedient. Matter of fact, we followed things in Slovakia, and I remember we had one of our older ladies, I'm pointing right here because she sat right there on the front row when I preached. Her name was Zdenka. And Zdenka spoke excellent in English. Matter of fact, she'd been to America a few times. And she got so tickled at Mark Blackwell and I because we were trying to check all of our boxes when we got our visas renewed. And you got to pay all these things, and you got to go down here and you got to get this silly little stamp and bring it over. Nobody looks at that stuff, But here Mark and I were trying to follow every little dot and tittle as we went back and got our long stay visas. And I remember she would just laugh at that. She thought that was such a waste of time and money. And these stamps were like 35 cents, so it wasn't a drain on the finances. But they didn't get that piece. That's not. Everybody kind of see what I'm saying there? They thought this violating the rules, breaking the rules, as long as you could get by with it, that was fine. And it's just not for us. Even if we know we're going to get by with it. It's like, again, bringing hunting and fishing to this, and we got some wildlife guys back here. My wife is a stickler for following every wildlife law that is available. If it's out there, my wife is going to follow it, and if she finds out she violated it, she will be in tears over it. That is the truth. I've seen her in tears more than once. But again, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of guys that kill as many deer as they want to kill. They kill a turkey anytime they want, whether it's on the corner or not, they don't care. And again, it has to do with our attitudes towards following the rulers and whatnot. All right, back on the slide. How is being subject and obedient to rulers and the authorities tied into being ready for every good deed? So how are those two things then connected?
It's an extension of the law of love.
Okay.
To, love God more than anything, love your neighbor as yourself.
Exactly. Right. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So it is a direct tie into that. I'm going to love God. I'm going to love my neighbors. And what that means is I'm going to set the proper example. I'm going to do my best to be obedient and submissive to the rulers and authorities to set the world around me a good example. That also is pleasing to God. So we cover both bases there. And I'm going to, in addition to that, I'm going to be looking for ways that I can serve my community, because that is part of the obedience and submission to my God. It is also beneficial for the community that I live in. So again, these two ideas, the subjection and the good deeds, they just fit together throughout this text. What kind of attitude does this describe? I think it describes a very willing, loving attitude towards God and towards our neighbor, towards our communities. What kind of citizen should we be? The very best we can be. Helping where we can help, being involved, we're involved. Kind of a funny thing happened to me over the weekend. I'll confess to you, I don't stop for people much on the side of the road. I usually try to check. Most of the time they have phones, so I'm not too worried about it. But there was a lady, I was coming to, this was Sunday afternoon, I was coming to Bible class. And she had come up Armstrong Road over there, and she turned her blinkers, she was in front of me, she turned her blinkers on, and then she just kind of drifted over the side of the road and stopped. And I thought, that's just weird behavior. So I slowed down, I rolled down my window and asked her if she was doing okay. Well, she works for one of the delivery places, and she was trying to find an address to deliver a package. So, y'all have seen those individuals that do that. And what was funny, that's the second time I have stopped and asked her if she needed help. I don't ask many people, but I've asked her twice. And she recognized me, and then we both just kind of laughed, and I drove off. But, again, I just use that kind of as a silly example that we just need to be in tune to what's going on around us, and being willing to serve and those kinds of things.
If you were willing to serve, you would have went ahead and delivered the package for her.
There you go. I'll take that from her. Well, she would not have been able to give it to me. I didn't want to make her, lose her job. It's a good try, though. All right. So, subject and obedient. And here's, as I was studying for this, you think of the word being subject and being obedient. A lot of the times we think about that as in a negative connotation. Oh, I gotta obey mom and dad, or I gotta obey the boss. Sometimes we have that mindset. I believe what Paul is saying here is that it needs to be something that is very positive for us. It needs to be an attitude. What behaviors describe a person who is subject to the authorities? Again, it is someone who is willing, prepared to go above and beyond with whatever it is that is around us. And again, it has to do with this idea of serving mankind. Back to what Mike mentioned just a minute ago about loving God and loving our neighbor. So these first two verses here, I think, are just really good. What does this tell us about our involvement in our communities? Okay, I think we need to be involved. Are there some examples that, because I know a lot of you guys are involved, a lot of you guys are thinking about this and going, I think we do this. What are some examples about serving in our communities with good intentions and good attitudes and those kinds of things? What are some things going on in the congregation, or perhaps some things that y'all are involved in?
Feeding hope.
Yeah, so the Feeding Hope, I think, is a great example of that. I'm very pleased with our crew that is doing that. I think it's great. What else? Is that what you also said, Gail?
Yeah, that's what I said, and with the school,
That's
George
right.
Washington.
We think about our service that we do with George Washington School. That has a huge impact. We saw a teacher today. Surprisingly, Logan and I were at Opera House today getting a coffee. And one of the coach teachers came in that Logan knew. I had met her before. I don't remember now what her name was. But we've talked with her before. She's very impressed with the church here. Very pleased with what, our congregation does for that school. It's great service. Anything else?
Missionary outreach.
Yeah, I think about the missionary stuff that we do, that Jared does. We had a group that went to Honduras, a group to Nicaragua. I think that does good stuff. I was looking back over here, I think about Integration Station. I don't know if y'all have ever eaten at Integration Station, but we have some of our members that work in there, and I think that's a great service. It's a great way to be involved in the community. So anyway, I think we just always need to be looking for ways to do that. I remember Logan has told stories about, he was in Oklahoma City, he was driving to the office. You'll probably remember this story. He was driving to the office, it's middle of the summer, there's this old man with a broke down lawnmower, grass about that tall, and he drives by him first, I think, feels guilty, turns around, goes back, and he ends up mowing this guy's front yard. Well, it ends up that the son of this man was a member of the church that hadn't been to church in years. And the dad told the son, hey, the preacher or the youth minister from the Church of Christ mowed my yard. Didn't even ask him, didn't charge me anything. And the son, I think, was at church there, that happened in Oklahoma City. And I thought, man, that's a great example. Exactly what we're talking about. Being prepared, being willing, having our eyes open to the things that are around us, ways that we can serve our community. So again, the ideas of submission to God and our good deeds are fitting together. They fit together. So on the other side, we've already talked about this a little bit. What is communicated to the world when we as Christians are not ready for good works and we do not submit to the authorities? Yeah, we know the answer to that, right? That is not a good statement to our world. Our world needs to see us. They need to interact with us. They need to hear our speech and realize that our conversations are different. I was in a meeting Tuesday night. This was last night. It seemed like forever ago. It was a terrible meeting. Anyway, this meeting I was in, one of the fellows that was in this meeting had his temper's about that short. And he lost his temper in this meeting. I mean, it was so bad, I thought about getting up and leaving. I didn't. But he claims to be a Christian. And I thought, I don't want to communicate to this group of men that I'm in this meeting with what that man just communicated to me. I'm not trying to judge him. I'm not judging his heart. I'm just saying, I don't want to communicate that to this world. I want to communicate patience and understanding. And sometimes we get the best of ourselves. And bad things happen sometimes. I understand, we're human, I know, but again, we see this teaching is super, super important. All right, any other comments?
I was
Yeah,
gonna
go
point
ahead.
out, where it says, remind them to be subject to rulers. There's, the Greek word there is arcane, and then it says when to be obedient is peth arcane, which is back to the arcane. They're both arcane, which is you're subject to arcane, which is the rulers, and then it goes back to be obedient to, it's the same root word, arcane.
Right.
So it goes back to rulers. So you're obedient to those rulers.
That's right.
Of course, we're obedient to them as far as they follow God. When they stop following God, and if they force us to choose between following God and following them, then we have to make a choice.
That's
you
right.
know. But other than that, we become better citizens if we become obedient.
Yeah, exactly right.
However, we're more than just citizens. We're something different. So Christians, anybody can just be a citizen, But a Christian who is a citizen, in and among those people notice the difference of the Christians who are citizens
Oh, yeah,
than just the
absolutely.
regular citizens.
That's right.
That's
At
an
least-
arcane suggestion.
Arcane, baby. Got
At
it.
least the world should know this.
Yes.
That's right. Now, all right, so he's not done with all this. He's fixing to put some more description on these two ideas. The submission part to the rulers and authorities, to our good deeds. So as we jump then into verse 2, he now said, so all that was all in verse 1. Here's verse 2. Be ready for every good deed, malign no one. Now, this phrase again implies, every one of these implies submission to God. Because this is his instruction to us as his people. Okay? So just want to point that out. Malign means to speak in a disrespectful way that demeans another. So that's the word, the Greek word, there's its definition. To speak in a disrespectful way to demean someone else. In what areas might we be tempted to malign someone else? Now, so leave this in the context, right?
I was going to say that the Greek word there is blasphemy.
That's right.
So we can blaspheme another person, not just God.
That's right.
We can speak evil or
Yep, that's right.
say some bad things about him, and that's Paul says that's blasphemy.
So if we
Don't do
leave
that.
this in its context, who specifically is he immediately talking about here?
Arcane.
The rulers and the authorities, whoever that might be. Don't malign them. But he adds to that, don't malign anyone. Malign no one. So we can't malign the rulers and the authorities. And you know what? If you hop on Facebook tonight, somebody is maligning somebody. It doesn't matter who you are,
Can't have it.
and you probably have to go through what, about three pages, and you're going to find somebody maligning somebody else. It's horrible. And again, it doesn't matter where you stand politically. That's just the world that we live in. In what other areas might we be tempted to malign someone? I think politically is one of those, with the rulers and the authorities, whatever the level of is. But who else?
Religiously.
We are very tempted to malign anybody else that disagrees with us in some way. Now, it's good. We need to disagree, right? We need to talk about truth. I'm fine with disagreeing. But not maligning somebody. Not talking about them in a disrespectful way that demeans them. And I have said some things, and I think all of us have heard them. In both politically and in the religious context.
I think especially that way because most people that attend different religious groups believe what they're doing. They're listening to someone,
Sure.
and they haven't studied it enough themselves. And their heart is, in their minds, is with God. So we're supposed to love those people and try to figure out how to.
Right. As a matter of fact, he's going to address that a little bit clearer in just a moment. I mean, Paul thinks about this very thing because he'll be there in just a second. Who else might we try to malign, or who else might we be tempted to malign?
Every job I've had, people have done that.
Yeah,
You get around a group of people that this one did this bad, this one is horrible.
And I hear that while I'm out and about as well. Sometimes we're tempted, I think, to malign brothers and sisters in Christ.
It's easy.
Paul says, do it.
It's easy to malign anyone that doesn't think the way you do or think the way you think they should.
Yeah.
Even if you yourself fall down in that area
Yeah.
from time to time.
And of course, what is the instruction in Scripture about how are we to behave with one another? Tolerant of one another, be understanding of one another. So all kinds of teaching there about how we are to behave with one another. And this idea of maligning is our country is saturated with it right now. I ask this question, is it ever okay to malign anyone? I'd say no, it is never okay.
Or
Never.
Really, really, really mad at it.
Yeah, unless you're really, really mad.
There's a difference between disagreeing with somebody and doing it in a respectful manner and
Exactly
just
right.
speaking evil of them.
That's right.
It's different, there's a difference there.
That's right. And again, Paul's gonna address that in just a moment. But what he's saying here is, don't disrespect and talk evil about others. And he puts there's a hard period there. Unless you feel like it's okay, you're justified. No. This idea of maligning people, from the mouth of the Christian, it should never come out of our mouth. Now, does it? Probably. Has it come out of my mouth? Yes. But that doesn't make it okay. How do we sometimes justify this behavior? They disagree with us. They've done bad things. It does not matter. We don't have that right to malign them. And sometimes we justify it. Now, one other sinful behavior is connected with maligning.
Judgment.
Judgment. That was the first one that came to my mind. We're judging their hearts. We're judging their attitudes. I don't know what's in your mind. I don't know what's in your hearts. But when we go to malign them and disrespect them and demean them, I think that's exactly what's going on. You're an evil man.
You can judge the fruits. You
We can judge the fruits.
actions. You are supposed to.
That's exactly
assess the nature of the actions. Is that an action that God is telling us, has told us that we need to engage in to live
That's right.
righteously? It's our responsibility to assess that.
That's right.
Can we call
But
them
not
snakes and?
But not to judge the person who did it. And you can have a conversation, talk about that action based on the scriptures.
That's right.
Is not the way. But it's the action,
Yeah.
not the person.
It's right. And it's judging the heart and running them down, disrespecting them. What'd you say, Brett?
I was just being smart aleck about, can we call them a brood of vipers and
Oh.
foxes like Jesus said and
Apparently we can.
so we're good with snakes.
Yeah. Of course, he was able to look into the heart and figure things out. If you can look into the heart, then I guess you're okay.
It's always been kind of a standard answer for me when people ask about judgment, because usually the first thing I'll go to
Yeah.
is, I'm responsible as a Christian to judge behavior, but only God can judge the heart.
That's right.
It's a pretty simplistic way to look at it, but it's true.
And it communicates quite clearly. All right, so he says, don't malign. Then he's going to come back with a series of positive things. Okay? So, don't malign anybody, but rather be peaceable. Now, here's what's interesting about this word again in the Greek. This Greek word literally means don't be a fighter. Don't be peaceable. Don't be a fighter. And I thought a lot about that, and I did some reading on it. And in what ways might we be a fighter? And I think there's positive ways that we can be peaceable and disagree at times. So there's that possibility. We're not talking about that scenario. We're talking about living peaceable and not being a fighter, not
having arguments with people.
Yeah, not being argumentative over matters over things that don't matter. And we sometimes do that. Now, we can let's talk about them, yeah, but don't argue about them. Don't fight about them.
I like this word confrontation.
Yeah, and you know, again, don't be a fighter. What other words might be included in this idea?
Aggressive.
Confrontational,
Aggressive.
yeah.
Boorish.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of other adjectives, and we all have been around folks that have, you know, we just don't want to be around them because, man, we just It's like this guy at this meeting last night. It's like, I don't even want to be in the same room with this guy. Because constantly, I mean, he's a fighter. He has, it's his way or the highway. He doesn't want any kind of peace to come about some of these conversations. And again, what does this kind of behavior tell the world? Oh, you're just like everybody else. You're just like the politicians I hear on TV. Running everybody down. Didn't fight, do I?
Whether we wanna be or not, we're a city on a hill.
That's
And our
exactly
lights
right.
will shine one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to defending truth, which we would all agree we need to defend truth, but what does our attitude need to be instead of a fighter?
As much as lies within you, let peace be with all men.
Be peaceable and just have a conversation. It's exactly right. Anyway, a lot of other things we could say about this, but I think this communicates the idea here. When we defend and glorify being a fighter, have we defended and glorified being a fighter in some ways? I think we have. And I think that's a dangerous road to travel down. We need to be peaceable and not always looking for a fight. All right, we got 2 minutes left. Not going to near get done. So he says, be peaceable. Secondly, he says, be gentle. So this carries 3 ideas: be meek, gentle, and humble. So all of those ideas kind of run together with being gentle. When we are not gentle, I think there's other issues at play in our life. Bitterness, anger, those kinds of things. Is there ever an excuse to not be gentle? No, never. Never an excuse. I believe it falls in the same way. Show consideration for all men. Once again, submission to God. The consideration includes gentleness and courtesy. So there's even an additional part of that Paul includes. This word is the antithesis of being self-centered. So we are being considerate of others. We are interested in them. And then I also wanted to get to here, and we'll end with this slide. There's some other stuff, neat stuff after this. As we look, that's verses 1 and 2. So like I said, this is a rich section. There's a lot of good stuff here. As we look at these 2 verses as a whole, what are we taught in general? What are we taught about our behavior in the world, as well as our behavior in the church and in our families? Just in a big piece, what are we taught from those 2 verses? The greatest commandment. And that's really what's found in those 2 verses. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's what Paul, I believe, just described in verses 1. Now, I think what we're going to do, I want to pick up because the richness of this text we've just started. So the next little section is, in my opinion, is where the best meat is. Because he's fixing to talk about the why of the submission. And that is found, I believe, in verses 3 down through 7. And that's the part that I really like in this section. All right, so let's stop right there. Would you like to do the prayer for us now?
Sure.
I didn't know if you had enough voice or not.
Maybe.
Okay.
Dear Lord our God, thank you for this opportunity to come together this evening and worship part of your word and study part of your word. And please be with us all. Be with everyone who's hurting and medical issues, whatever. Please watch over them all. With us. As we leave this place, keep us all safe, help us all to be better Christians, and do a better job of showing that we're Christians in public. We thank you for everything in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Well,